Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Kaga. So today I'm going to be continuing my exploration into tactics and strategy on the channel. And since I'm having a boatload of fun, pun intended, playing the Japanese destroyers, particularly the Kagero, though I've had some nice games in the Fubuki and similar ships in recent memory, the Kagero has just about everything that I really want in one of these ships. And you might be sitting there going, it's got those great torpedoes. It's not the fastest ship ever. In fact, it's one of the more sluggish destroyers, if you will. I mean, it will break, 35 knots in a straight line, but just barely. It's got punchy guns, yeah, but they're in really slow turning and slow firing turrets. The tactics just got interesting. Because, and here's the question you need to pose to yourself, is how do we bring our most potent weapon to bear against the enemy? Well, you could spam them, but that tends to leave a lot of randomness in there. There's gonna be some randomness in there, and I don't mean like the RNG type of randomness. I mean how is the enemy going to maneuver? Will there be anything that will detect them out there? Because you need to remember the Kagero is, and I'm going to use this as an example. You have either 15 or 20 kilometer range torpedoes that, if you're using the torpedo acceleration skill, and I suspect that you probably are, where you trade 20% of the range to gain an additional 5 knots of speed. And in that case, you're dealing with approximately 12 kilometer range and 16 kilometer range torpedoes, respectively. And that still leaves, that is a lot of distance. And that equates to a lot of time for a number of things to happen. They can get detected like planes, like my ship has just now. They can get spotted by an enemy destroyer you didn't know was there, and subsequently everyone else and their brother knows that they're there. An enemy can just have this random sense that it goes, use your sonar, dumbass, use it, and then go bloop, and hello, there's torpedoes there, and everyone sees them. And it's not good if you want those to hit. So naturally you need to start thinking about things a little differently. Let's start by trying to figure out who our prime targets are as a destroyer. Well, usually you're not going to be using your torpedoes against enemy destroyers. Not usually. You can do it, but you're not likely to hit. Likewise, you have the option of torpedoing cruisers. These are more tempting targets than, say, destroyers, but only just. And I say this because cruisers have those annoying fighter planes that they almost all carry. Anymore, without the ever-present, or rather that guarantee that you are going to run into an enemy carrier that you used to have during the closed beta test. You see a lot more cruisers running with the hydroacoustic sonar search, and that's going to put some, that's going to just go ahead, throw the wrench into your plans. And even if everything goes according to plan, you're not likely to get more than a single torpedo on the target, unless they really are not paying attention, in which case then they're prime torpedo targets. So that leaves the very big ships. You're not likely going to see the carrier on the front line, so we're not going to plan on that one. But you can, when you get the opportunity later in the battle, certainly we would like to torpedo that carrier. But it's going to be difficult because, one, most carriers have maneuverability on the order of cruisers rather than battleships, despite their size, or battle cruisers. They also have, they usually every few minutes have planes just orbiting them, preparing for landing, or staging up for whatever battle actions that they're going to do later on. Or some of the more harder to hit targets in terms of carriers that you might face as a Japanese destroyer captain would be those that know how to do the almost the revolving door tactic, where they're pretty much striking continuously and cycling their flight deck crews pretty much all the time. So that pretty much leaves that our prime number one target, as you would have expected, are battleships. Big, dumb battleships. Because you know what? Most battleships have slow rudder shift time, so they're slow responding, they have a lot of health, and when they eat one, they will usually eat a second or even a third one, just like that. So you're guaranteeing yourself anywhere between 15 and 30,000 damage right there, and at least one flood, which is good. At least from our perspective, talking about applying the tactics for Japanese destroyers. And you know what? When you have a really, well, let's call them quote-unquote well-deserving, shall we say, battleship captain that eats, 70% of the torpedoes that you fired in any given launch of it. And that's the kind of thing that destroyer captains dream about. They probably sit there just salivating every single time they pull the trigger, just in hopes that that's what they get out of it, because that's when the damage numbers go to upwards of about 70,000, 90,000 in that hit. And you just have that cringe, and yet you feel a certain amount of glee that comes out of that, because you know what? That is experience in your pocket, basically. And you know what? That's one of the great things that I've discovered about destroyers. And I actually discovered this when they adjusted the experience equation to have greater influence from battle actions like capturing and defending bases, is that destroyers are perhaps the single greatest mill of, I'd hate to use the word mill, but they're not quite like a fabrication press just yet, but they really are one of those great millstones that you can just grind out a large pool of free experience if you are doing some pretty basic things. And for the Japanese destroyer, really and truly, the core skill set that you have is knowing when or when not to fire your guns. Knowing when not to probably being more imperative than knowing when to. You'll get yourself into more trouble than it's worth by firing your guns when you really shouldn't have. And the second one, and this is the big virtue, is you have to be reading that map and positioning yourself accordingly. You have to be making the most use out of the enemy's disposition to try to land those torpedoes or to destabilize their flank for allies. It's just simple, those two simple things, really and truly. The second one is a very broad thing where part of it can come from you throwing the torpedoes around and carrying your weight that way, but another one can be done as well. And this is one of the parts of the capture game, is looking for the opportunity to go to the next capture point, especially in domination game modes with more than 2 points. I know, I still remember, I'm having this great moment where I still want to call it Conquest, the 2-point domination game mode as Conquest. Old closed beta test habits. And when you get to like the 3 or the 4 points, destroyers really need to be looking for opportunities to break past the enemy through the weaknesses in their lines to capture the next point, to change the rates at which the enemy is gaining points, to possibly bring another point into the fold, and at the same time, what it does is it leaves a trap. The enemy has to respond to that. You start dictating what they have to do next. And I know that you'd be tempted to try to grab your US destroyers for this, or even the Soviet destroyers, because the first one is got great guns, they're reasonably stealthy, at least in comparison to the Soviet destroyers. They still have decent torpedoes, and you know what? They're not bad little ships. They can certainly do the job. And now you definitely sitting there, you don't want to do this type of tactic with the Soviet destroyers because, you know, they have the detectability of a cruiser. Now, why would I choose the Japanese ones specifically for the job? Well, tier for tier, they have the best concealment ratings, which means there are more options for them to exploit on the battlefield. There are many avenues that they can pursue getting through the enemy line or past the enemy line that other destroyers would never be able to exploit because of that lower detection rating. And you have to be, when you're doing this, you're usually running very thin needles. Not needles, you're threading the needles. You're just going right at the edge whenever possible. And there are many reasons to do this. The first being is that tends to be the shortest route from point A to point B while meeting that condition of concealment that will lend itself to your speed, the deposition of the enemy team, and, you know, generally speaking, I hate to say this, but rounds are won and lost in seconds. And I don't mean like down to the wire type of thing, but in terms of which team chose the actions which best suited them winning in such a way where they didn't waste time. Wasted time in this game is disastrous. And that brings into another point about these particular destroyers, is that they can control time. They can disrupt enemy formations, they can disrupt enemy movements, and they can keep doing it every minute and a half or so. And until they themselves get disrupted by either being spotted from the air, being ambushed by a Soviet destroyer, or being lit up by hydroacoustics, or in the recent patch that hit just yesterday, the World of Warships update 0.5.4, the advent of long-ranged radar on the Soviet cruisers changed the game yet again, where they could get unveiled at, I think, like 15 kilometers, a really big distance there, and you can have this just start wreaking havoc on your ability to disrupt the time flow of the game, that to be beneficial to you winning. And now, that's not a really big deal for the Japanese destroyer line, because unlike a lot of other destroyers that you could think of, or other ships in particular that rely so heavily on their guns, the Japanese destroyers don't necessarily need to engage to have an impact on the battle. In that respect, you have to change the way you think about playing them from more of like traditional chess, where you win by taking out the enemy ships, so much as you win the way you do in the Asian game Go, where you occupy the space. And you're constantly trying to get around the enemy. You're always trying to hit them in the sides with everything from encirclement to traps, whatever have you, in order to get the edge on the opponent and claim the appropriate unit on the board. I can even extend this analogy for viewing how to play these particular ships to the point where this is also how you should be viewing your opportunities to engage and to disengage, particularly in the instance where you can make that extra bit of difference in capturing the domination points on a given map. At least when you're in your Japanese destroyers, because you have that great concealment. You have fairly good speed. You can make use of these to good effect in keeping these points captured and controlling that space and affecting the rate at which points are accumulated, or in some cases not accumulated, because you also not just have the ability to capture, you have the ability to stall, because most people will not lunge after that destroyer sitting in that cap, but they will try to counter stall your presence to keep that point from falling in enemy hands. And as a result, you can do anything from attack and defend these capture points to, in a sense, game the experience equation. And, that just comes down to your tactics here. A simple change in your tactics can produce fairly good results in both your earned experience and your free experience. And from that, you can increase your growth in not only this particular line, but also in general when you want to, say, explore a new ship line or skip a particularly bad ship or purchase the one particular upgrade that turns a meh ship into a good one. There's a few ships that, you don't really want to go through them stock, and they have that stock ship syndrome, and you just want to get it over with. Well, if you change the way you play a particular ship to suit its strengths, in this case, the Japanese destroyers are great mills of free experience, then you can also expand your grinding efforts, or not really expand, but accelerate them, so that you're not going through the sluggy fest to get up the tree, and that you can truly enjoy the ships you want to enjoy as much as you can. But I will hasten to add to all of this that because you're now trying to think about things in a more tactical sense and keeping an eye on the grand strategy of where do you need to be to not only maximize your own effectiveness, but also maximize the chance of you winning by dominating that space, you need to be much more careful and exercise greater amounts of discretion on when you fire your torpedoes, since they are the primary weapon by which you do this. You need to consciously keep track of your load times, your striking distances, and which targets do you prioritize, which targets do you use a single launch for, how many launches you have, and most importantly, is that target worth firing all your torpedoes at, or might there be another one after that? You're going to want at least one clutch of torpedoes to help deal with. I know that was a fair bit of fairly out there, if you will, theory, but I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you'll find it helpful. If you did happen to like it, please consider giving it a like down below. If you're new to the channel, I'd like to see you around for our continued discussions on strategy and tactics in not only just World of Warships, but in gaming in general. So, plans for content on the channel to come. We'll finish off the week with some more World of Warships content, and then we'll pick back up next week with yet more Warships. We will continue our little excursion into Armored Warfare's Chinese main battle tank lines on Tuesday. War Thunder Wednesdays will continue, and I have a absolute bang up of a game in ground RB for you all, and I hope to have this worked out by then. We may see the launch of the Art of War series to be featured on this channel, as interpreted for gaming as a whole. So please look forward to that, and we will continue to end the week with some more World of Warships. So we're going to start that week off and end the week more or less with Warships, and just kind of put some new variety into the channel as much as we can, you know? Good stuff. Well, thank you for having bared with me for almost 22 minutes at this point. So I'd like to thank you and bid you a good day